What would happen if the quiet nurse everyone ignored was actually the most experienced person in the hospital, when a powerful man's life suddenly began to fall apart? And what if the arrogant son who thought money could control everyone was about to discover that some battles could not be won by shouting? Mara Bennett arrived at Harbor Ridge Medical Center at 5:38 on a stormy evening, 22 minutes before her shift officially began. She was always early. The rain had been falling since late afternoon, covering the roads around Norfolk with a gray curtain. Wind pushed sheets of water across the hospital parking structure, while distant thunder rolled over the waterfront. Mara stepped out of her old gray sedan and pulled her coat tighter around her navy blue scrubs. For a moment, she stood beneath the concrete roof and listened. Thunder. Most people heard nothing more than bad weather. Mara heard something else. She remembered the sound of a helicopter engine struggling against heavy wind. She remembered red emergency lights flashing inside a dark cabin. She remembered metal shaking beneath her boots while an injured soldier fought for every breath. Then she remembered someone shouting that the landing area was no longer safe. The memory disappeared as quickly as it came. Mara blinked, looked toward the hospital entrance, and walked inside. At the employee entrance, a security officer checked her identification. "Rough night," he said, glancing toward the storm. Mara looked through the glass doors. "I've seen worse." The guard smiled, assuming she was joking. She wasn't. Mara walked toward the elevators without explaining herself. Harbor Ridge Medical Center stood beside the Elizabeth River like a huge monument of glass and steel. Its emergency department served Navy families, dock workers, travelers, construction workers, and people injured on the highways surrounding Norfolk. The hospital was known for its trauma department. It was also known for its cardiovascular institute. The newest wing occupied the upper floors, where wealthy patients received private rooms, private meals, private entrances, and almost complete privacy. On the 12th floor, everything felt different. Downstairs, patients waited under bright fluorescent lights. Families filled crowded chairs. Nurses hurried between rooms. Phones rang constantly. Upstairs, carpets softened every footstep. The lighting was warm. The furniture looked expensive. The walls carried paintings instead of medical posters. Money had not removed suffering. It had simply taught suffering to become quiet. Mara stepped out of the elevator and approached the nursing station. Sarah Miller was finishing the evening report. Sarah was 41 and had worked at Harbor Ridge long enough to recognize trouble before it officially arrived. She looked up. "You're early again." Mara placed her bag beneath the desk. "You say that every shift. I'm hoping embarrassment will eventually change your behavior." "It hasn't worked yet." Sarah laughed and slid a tablet across the desk. "Our main concern is room 12. Mara looked at the screen. Richard Vance. 67 years old. Congestive heart failure. Fluid surrounding the heart. Blood pressure trending downward. Continuous cardiac monitoring. Mara's eyes moved over the numbers. How closely are they watching him? Repeat ultrasound in the morning. Manual pressure every 4 hours. Continuous monitoring. Last pressure? 98/64. Mara looked at the earlier readings. 112/72. Then 106/68. Then 102/66. Now 98/64. Every number by itself could be explained. Together, they told a different story. Mara looked back at Sarah. What about his son? Sarah's expression changed. Derek Vance. Mara waited. Sarah lowered her voice. He's been here most of the afternoon. Problem. He hasn't technically done anything wrong. That usually means there is a problem. Sarah smiled. He knows 3 hospital board members, 2 vice presidents, and apparently half the city. He doesn't raise his voice. He just asks for something as though the answer has already been approved. And if the answer is no, he keeps asking. Until someone becomes nervous about being the person who said no. Mara continued reading the chart. Sarah leaned closer. Up here, we take care of the patient and manage the family. Mara looked at her. Which one has the higher mortality rate? Sarah stared at her for a second. Then she laughed. You are either much funnier than you look or much more dangerous than you seem. Mara signed into the medical system. Those aren't mutually exclusive. 3 months earlier, Mara had believed the 12th floor might be the perfect place to disappear. It was controlled, predictable, quiet. There were specialists everywhere. Machines monitored almost everything. Protocols existed for nearly every emergency. No one was dragging in a patient with a shattered leg while gunfire sounded in the distance. No one was asking her to estimate blood loss while an aircraft shook around her. No one was forcing her to choose which injured person would receive the last available unit of blood. That was exactly why she had chosen this hospital. Mara had spent 9 years in the United States Navy. Her public employment records described her as a medical professional with experience in operational medicine and leadership. They did not describe the places she had worked. They did not describe the missions. They did not describe the people she had carried. They did not describe the decisions she had made when there was no time to call someone else. Mara had treated wounded personnel inside moving aircraft. She had worked in temporary medical facilities where walls shook from distant explosions. She had coordinated emergency evacuations when every second mattered. During her final major operation, 12 people had needed to be evacuated from a collapsing position. 11 survived. The official report called the mission successful. Mara never liked that word. 8 months after leaving active service, Mara joined Harbor Ridge. Her co-workers knew she had been in the Navy. Most assumed she had worked in a clinic. Some guessed she had served on a hospital ship. Mara never corrected them. She had no desire to explain the difference between being a nurse and being the person everyone looked toward when an entire medical team had seconds to decide who lived. In the locker room, Mara opened her bag. Inside was an old metal watch. Its surface was scratched. Across the back were 12 tiny initials. She touched them gently. Thunder shook the building. Mara closed the locker. Then she walked toward room 12. Richard Vance was awake. At 67, he still had the presence of a man who had spent decades controlling rooms. Illness had weakened his body. It had not weakened his awareness. His white hair was combed neatly backward. A thin oxygen tube rested beneath his nose. A financial news channel played silently on the television. Derek stood beside the window with his phone pressed against his ear. "No," he said. "Do not release that statement." Mara paused outside the room. Derek continued. "If they find out he's here, they'll move before Monday." He ended the call. Mara entered. Richard watched her wash her hands. "You must be the nurse who checks the machine and then checks whether the machine is telling the whole truth." Mara glanced at the monitor. "Machines don't lie." Richard smiled slightly. "No. They report what they detect. And people decide what it means." Richard studied her. Derek turned around. His eyes immediately went to her identification badge. "Mara Bennett. That's right. You're new. 3 months." Derek folded his arms. "That's new." Mara picked up the blood pressure cuff. "How are you feeling, Mr. Vance?" Richard answered before Derek could. "Like everyone keeps asking me that instead of telling me what's wrong." Mara wrapped the cuff around his arm. "That depends on what your body tells me." She took the pressure manually. The monitor showed 100/65. The cuff showed 96/62. Derek noticed the difference. "Which one goes into the chart?" "Both." "That sounds inconsistent." "It's complete." Richard looked amused. Mara continued her examination. She checked his neck veins, listened to his lungs, checked his pulse, pressed carefully beneath his ribs. "Any increase in pressure?" "Some chest discomfort." "Pain?" Richard hesitated. "Not exactly." "When is it worse?" "When I lie down." Derek stepped closer. "He told the doctor that earlier." Mara looked at Richard. "They gave you medication?" "Something for the pain." "How much?" 2 milligrams. "Did it help?" "For about an hour." Mara looked at the blood pressure. Then she raised the head of the bed. "Keep him in this position." Derek frowned. "Why?" "He is more comfortable upright. My father needs rest. He needs circulation." Derek looked irritated. "What does that mean?" Mara checked the monitor. It means we don't change his position without checking how his body responds. Derek's voice hardened. He isn't a piece of furniture. Mara met his eyes. No. Furniture doesn't develop obstructive shock. The room became silent. Richard slowly turned his head toward his son. Then he looked at Mara. For the first time, his expression showed genuine interest. Mara finished the assessment and stepped toward the medication chart. Derek picked up a paper bag from a nearby cabinet. I brought soup. Mara looked at the label. She handed it back. Too much sodium. It's his favorite. He is retaining fluid. Derek stared at her. My father paid for half the cardiovascular building downstairs. Mara placed the soup back into the cabinet. Then he has invested heavily in understanding why this is a bad idea. Richard closed his eyes. A small smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Derek noticed. He didn't like it. Mara documented the blood pressure difference, the positional discomfort, and the changes she had observed. Then she called Dr. Nora Hayes. Nora was responsible for several patients across 2 floors. I saw your note, Nora said. I need another bedside ultrasound. He had one this morning. The trend has changed. There was a short silence. What are you seeing? A patient using more effort to maintain less circulation. Nora became more serious. I'll come up after I finish with another patient. How long? 20 minutes. Mara looked through the glass at Richard. Okay. She ended the call. At 7:15, Richard received another phone call. Mara was adjusting his intravenous line when she heard fragments of the conversation. Debt purchase. Terminal rights. Emergency board vote. Victor Kane. Richard's expression remained calm, but his heart rate increased. Who knows? A pause. I am hospitalized. The board, legal counsel, immediate family, and senior administration. That's already too many people. He ended the call. Rain struck the windows harder. Richard looked at Mara. How private is this floor? Medical records are restricted. That wasn't my question. Mara looked at him. Richard lowered his voice. Victor Kane has spent 6 years trying to take my company. And he failed. In court. At the board table. Everywhere else. Richard looked toward the closed door. If he proves I can't lead anymore, he gets another vote. Mara checked the seal on his foreport. You believe someone is sharing information. I believe weakness attracts people who have been waiting for permission. Mara looked at him. Have you received any direct threats? Nothing direct. Unusual visitors? Richard gave a tired smile. Only the usual unusual people. Mara entered a request for additional visitor verification. Richard noticed. Most people would tell me I'm paranoid. Most people use that word when they don't want to investigate. Richard studied her. His eyes moved toward a faint scar near her wrist. Military. Mara nodded. Which branch? Navy. Medical. Yes. Richard waited for more. Mara returned to the monitor. Nothing else was offered. That answer told him everything he needed to know. The story was only beginning. And neither Richard Vance nor his son Derek had any idea that the quiet nurse standing beside the bed had already faced situations far more dangerous than anything happening inside their expensive hospital room. At 8:03 that evening, Derek returned from the private lounge. He carried himself differently around his father than he did around the hospital staff. The confidence was still there, but beneath it was something Mara recognized immediately. Fear. Derek had grown up believing his father could solve anything. Business problems, lawsuits, financial disasters, angry investors, hostile competitors. Richard Vance had always found a way through them. Now his father needed oxygen just to finish a sentence. Derek hated the machines because they reminded him that power had limits. He hated the nurses because they witnessed his father's weakness. And most of all, he hated the helplessness he felt whenever one of the numbers on the monitor changed. So he did what he knew best. He pushed. Cardiology should be here already, Derek said. Mara was checking Richard's for. Dr. Hayes is reviewing him. Reviewing him isn't treating him. She has been informed of the changes. My father doesn't wait in line. Mara looked at him. He isn't in line. Derek stepped closer. Then why are we waiting? Because the physician responsible for his care has not ordered an emergency procedure. Derek's jaw tightened. You seem very comfortable with that. I'm comfortable telling you exactly where the decision stands. Richard opened his eyes. Derek. His son looked toward him. I'm trying to protect you. Richard's voice was weak, but the words were clear. You're trying to defeat the room. The room isn't doing enough. You think being loud is the same as being useful. Derek looked away. Richard continued. You built your entire life believing you could force every door open. Derek's face hardened. You taught me that. No, Richard said quietly. I taught you to recognize when the door was already open. Derek said nothing. Mara adjusted Richard's oxygen. Then she returned to the nurse's station. His pulse pressure had narrowed again. The numbers were still inside the hospital's accepted range. That was the problem. A number could be acceptable while a patient was becoming dangerous. Mara knew that lesson better than anyone around her. In the military, she had learned that emergencies rarely announce themselves with perfect timing. A patient didn't always collapse first and then become sick. Sometimes the body whispered. Sometimes it warned you through a dozen small changes. The people who survived were often the ones who listened before the warning became a scream. At 8:40, Dr. Nora Hayes finally arrived. She looked exhausted. Her hair was pulled back, and there were dark circles beneath her eyes. She had been moving between patients for nearly 10 hours. Show me what changed, Nora said. Mara placed the latest readings beside the earlier ones. The systolic pressure continues to fall. Nora studied the numbers. The diastolic is holding. His discomfort is increasing when he lies back. Heart rate, 96. That's not alarming. Not by itself. Nora looked at her. What else? His neck veins are more prominent. His pulse feels weaker. His heart sounds are slightly more distant. Nora turned toward the room. Let's examine him. They entered together. Richard watched them. Derek stood near the window. Nora checked the patient and then ordered a limited bedside ultrasound. The screen filled with moving images of Richard's heart. Fluid surrounded it. Not enough, yet, for everyone in the room to agree that immediate intervention was required. But Mara saw something else. The right side of the heart was beginning to compress during part of the cardiac cycle. Nora stared at the screen. Richard looked at her. Bad. Nora didn't answer immediately. We're going to continue close monitoring. Mara looked at the clock. Full echo in the morning? Yes. That's more than 10 hours. The cardiologist is across the river, and the storm is making travel difficult. Mara kept her voice calm. We can call now. Nora looked at her. Based on what threshold? The trend. Concern isn't the same as an indication for a procedure. I know. He's not there yet. Mara looked through the glass at Richard. Not yet. Nora removed her gloves. Manual pressure every 30 minutes. Call me immediately if systolic drops below 90, if his mental status changes, if his heart rate rises significantly, or if his oxygen level falls. I've been checking every 15 minutes. Nora's expression became serious. You're not the physician responsible for the decision. No. Mara looked at Richard. I'm the person standing beside him while the decision becomes urgent. Silence filled the room. Nora held her gaze. Then she nodded. Document everything. I will. Nora left. Richard watched Mara for several seconds. You don't make many friends that way. Mara disposed of her gloves. I didn't come here to collect them. That sounds lonely. It's efficient. Richard smiled faintly. Those aren't the same thing. Mara had no answer. At 9:12, Sarah found Mara in the locker room. Mara was holding the old metal watch. Sarah leaned against the doorway. Gift? Mara looked at the watch. Yes. From someone important. Several people. Sarah noticed the initials on the back. She didn't ask what they meant. Instead, she handed Mara a bottle of water. Everyone has a theory about you. Mara opened the bottle. That sounds inefficient. Sarah laughed. Former surgeon. Mara shook her head. Secret billionaire. No. Witness protection. Disappointing. Sarah smiled. You don't have to explain your life. But people trust one harmless fact. Mara thought for a moment. I dislike cinnamon. Sarah nodded seriously. That is deeply humanizing. A call light sounded. Mara was already moving before Sarah could turn. Inside room 12, Richard was sitting forward. One hand was pressed against his chest. His blood pressure had fallen to 92/58. His oxygen level was 93%. His skin looked damp. Derek stood beside him. He needs something for the pain. Mara checked Richard's pulse. Tell me what you're feeling. Pressure. Sharp? No. Where? Center of my chest. Does it change when you move? It's better when I lean forward. Derek pointed toward the medication cabinet. Give him what worked earlier. Mara checked the chart. His next dose isn't due yet. Then give it now. The order was changed because his blood pressure is falling. My father is in pain. I know. Then help him. I am helping him. Derek stared at her. You are standing there while he suffers. Mara looked at Richard. The medication could lower his pressure further and hide the signs that his condition is worsening. Then call someone. I already have. Call again. I will. Derek stepped into the hallway after her. My father is in pain, and you're hiding behind a chart. The chart reflects his condition. You people always find an excuse. Mara stopped walking. Your father needs circulation more than recognition. Derek's face changed. What did you say? I said his blood pressure is falling. You know who my father is? I know what his chart says. Derek stepped closer. My family built this floor. Mara's expression remained calm. Your father needs his heart to keep working. Derek stared at her. Every other person here understands how this works. I understand exactly how it works. Then act like it. Mara looked directly at him. His blood pressure is falling because fluid may be compressing his heart. Derek said nothing. Giving him more medication could lower his pressure further. It could also make him appear calmer while his circulation becomes worse. Derek's breathing became heavier. So what do you want me to do? Let us treat the cause instead of hiding the symptoms. You really think you can say no to me? His medication schedule isn't a negotiation. We'll see about that. There is nothing to see. Derek stepped closer. Do you know what my father's name means in this building? Mara didn't move. I know what his condition means. Behind the glass, Richard shifted in bed. The monitor continued its steady rhythm. Derek looked through the window. His father's eyes were closed. For the first time that evening, Derek looked less like a powerful businessman and more like a frightened son. Mara turned back toward the nurse's station. The numbers still looked survivable. The pattern did not. Sarah came beside her. Something wrong. Not yet. Sarah looked toward the monitor. They're still within parameters. That's what worries me. Mara watched the waveform moving across the screen. Each pulse appeared slightly smaller than the previous one. Sarah followed her gaze. You think he's getting worse? Mara picked up the earlier rhythm strip. I know he's changing. Dr. Hayes said to call below 90. I heard her. So what are you seeing? Mara placed the old strip beside the new one. The heart is working harder for less output. Sarah looked at the 2 pages. I can see the pressure change. The machine is seeing it too. Then why isn't it alarming? Because machines measure thresholds. Sarah looked at her. And you? I watch patterns. Mara returned to room 12. Richard was still conscious. His breathing was controlled but shallow. Derek stood beside the bed. Mara checked his pulse. It was weaker. How does the pressure feel now? Richard swallowed. Worse. Where? A little higher in the center. Any dizziness? Not yet. Mara raised the bed slightly. Stay forward. Derek looked at her. You keep repeating the same instructions. Because his condition hasn't stopped changing. When is someone actually going to fix this? When the risk of waiting becomes greater than the risk of intervention. Derek shook his head. That sounds like an excuse. Richard opened his eyes. Derek. His son stopped. Richard looked toward Mara, then toward his son. She's doing her job. Derek said nothing. Mara checked Richard's pupils, his skin temperature, his oxygen level, his capillary refill. Then she listened carefully to his heart. The sounds were softer than before. One finding meant little. Together, the findings were becoming impossible to ignore. Mara stepped into the hallway and called Dr. Hayes again. Nora answered on the fourth ring. What changed? Chest pressure increased. His pulse is weaker. Heart sounds are more distant. He's more comfortable leaning forward. Blood pressure 92/58. That's still above the call parameter. Barely. Oxygen. 93. Any confusion? No. Then continue monitoring. Mara looked through the glass. I want cardiology called now. We already discussed this. The storm is getting worse. I know. If we wait until he meets every textbook sign, the travel time becomes part of the emergency. Nora was silent. Mara continued. He's moving in the wrong direction. I need objective deterioration. You have it. I need enough to justify emergency activation. Mara looked at Richard. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Then don't wait for the number. The line went quiet. Nora finally spoke. I'll review the chart again. Mara ended the call. She returned to the room. Richard looked at her. What did she say? She's reviewing everything. That means no. It means she's deciding. Richard gave a weak smile. You've done this before. Mara paused. Done what? Watch someone become worse while everyone else searched for permission to act. Mara looked at him. Yes. Richard studied her face. Where? Mara glanced at the old scar on her wrist. Somewhere very far from here. Outside, thunder exploded over the river. The lights flickered for half a second. Derek looked toward the window. Mara looked at the monitor. Richard's blood pressure dropped again. 90. Exactly 90. The machine displayed the number. Mara's expression changed. Only slightly. But Sarah saw it. She immediately reached for the phone. Mara stopped her. Not yet. Sarah looked confused. Why not? Mara stared at Richard. Because now we know the next few minutes matter. And somewhere beneath the calm surface of Harbor Ridge Medical Center, another problem was beginning to move toward them. One that had nothing to do with medicine, and everything to do with why Richard Vance had suddenly become the most valuable patient in the hospital. The number 90 stayed on the screen for only a few seconds. Then it changed. 89. Sarah immediately reached for the emergency phone, but Mara was already moving. Call Dr. Hayes, Mara said. Tell her the pressure has crossed the threshold. Sarah picked up the phone. Mara entered Richard's room. Mr. Vance, I need you to stay exactly where you are. Richard looked at her. That serious? Serious enough. Derek stood beside the bed. What happened? His blood pressure dropped. How far? 89 systolic. Derek looked at the monitor. That's only 1 point. Mara turned toward him. 1 point can be the difference between a warning and an emergency. Richard took a slow breath. His eyes remained open. Am I dying? Derek immediately looked at Mara. She did not lie. You are becoming unstable. Richard nodded. That's not what I asked. Mara pulled a stool beside the bed. No. I don't believe you are dying right now. Derek exhaled. But something is wrong, Mara continued. And we need to find out how quickly it is changing. Richard looked toward the ceiling. That's the most honest answer I've heard all day. Mara adjusted the oxygen. Keep breathing slowly. Derek moved toward the door. I'm getting the doctor. Sarah already called. I'll make sure she comes. Mara looked at him. Don't leave the floor. Derek stopped. Why? Because I may need information from you. What information? Medication history. Recent symptoms. Anything unusual. Derek hesitated. Then he nodded. For the first time that evening, he followed an instruction without arguing. Sarah entered. Dr. Hayes is on her way. Mara nodded. Bring the emergency cart closer, but don't open it yet. Sarah understood. She moved quickly. The room became quieter. Outside, rain struck the windows so hard that the glass seemed to vibrate. Richard's breathing became slightly faster. Mara noticed immediately. Any dizziness? A little. Any change in your vision? No. Feeling faint? Not yet. Mara checked his pulse. Weak. Fast enough to matter. She looked toward the door. Derek was watching everything. His face had lost its earlier arrogance. What can I do? He asked. Mara looked at him. Tell me exactly what happened before he came to the hospital. Derek hesitated. He had chest pressure. When? Yesterday. How long? Maybe 10 minutes. Did he see anyone? He spoke to his cardiologist. What did the cardiologist say? That he was retaining fluid and needed to be evaluated. Anything else? Derek rubbed his forehead. He refused the ambulance. Mara looked at Richard. Why? Richard answered weakly. I had a board meeting. Derek almost laughed. You had a board meeting you couldn't attend. Richard gave him a tired look. I didn't know that then. Mara continued. Any fever? No. Cough. Nothing unusual. New medication? Derek shook his head. Not that I know of. Mara looked at Richard. Blood thinner? Same as always. Beta blocker? Same. Diuretic? Same. Mara nodded. The information helped. But something still bothered her. She looked at Richard's monitor, then at his face, then at the fluid around his heart on the earlier ultrasound image. Her instincts became louder. Dr. Hayes entered the room. What happened? Pressure dropped to 89. Nora immediately moved to the bedside. Repeat it manually. Mara did. 88/54. Nora's expression changed. Okay. She checked Richard herself. How do you feel? Like everyone is staring at me. Nora smiled briefly. That's because you are currently the most interesting person in the building. Richard closed his eyes. Wonderful. Nora reviewed the monitor. Let's repeat the ultrasound. Mara stepped aside. Nora scanned the heart. The room remained silent. Then Nora stopped. That's different. Mara leaned closer. What do you see? More compression. Derek looked between them. What does that mean? Nora answered carefully. It means the fluid around your father's heart may now be interfering with how the heart fills. Derek stared at the screen. Can you fix it? Nora looked at Mara. Then back at Derek. Potentially. Then do it. We need cardiology. Call them. I already have. Call again. Nora nodded. I will. Derek looked at Mara. How long? Mara didn't answer. Nora did. As long as it takes. Derek's frustration returned. My father doesn't have time for this. Nora turned toward him. Then help us by staying calm. Derek opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Richard watched his son. Listen to her. Derek slowly stepped back. Mara checked the monitor. Richard's heart rate was climbing. The blood pressure remained low. His oxygen level fell from 93 to 91. Mara immediately adjusted the oxygen support. Richard looked at her. Am I getting worse? Yes. The honesty startled Derek. But Richard nodded. Good. Derek frowned. Good. Richard looked at him. Now everyone knows. The emergency phone rang. Sarah answered. Cardiology is on the way. How long? They're coming from the other side of the hospital. Mara looked at Nora. We don't have long. Nora nodded. I know. Richard suddenly gripped Mara's wrist. His fingers were weak. Mara. She looked down. Yes. If something happens. Don't. Listen. Mara waited. Richard's breathing became more difficult. If something happens, don't let my son make a decision because he's afraid. Derek looked at his father. Dad. Richard continued. He confuses control with protection. Derek's face tightened. Mara looked at him. Then at Richard. I'll make sure your care follows the medical plan. Richard released her wrist. That was enough. The room filled with movement. Sarah brought the emergency equipment closer. Nora requested additional access. Mara checked the 4-line. Derek stepped against the wall. For once, nobody was shouting. Nobody was discussing money. Nobody cared about board members. There was only one patient. And a heart that was running out of room. The cardiology team finally arrived. A senior cardiologist entered with another physician and a technician. What do we have? Nora gave the report quickly. Known pericardial effusion. Progressive narrowing pressure. Positional chest discomfort. Increasing neck venous pressure. Weak pulse. Now hypotensive. The cardiologist looked at the ultrasound. Tamponade. Derek stared at him. Is that what you said earlier? The cardiologist nodded. It's now clinically significant. Mara watched the team prepare. The procedure was explained to Richard. He listened quietly. Then he looked at Derek. You're going to be okay. Derek's eyes filled with emotion. I'm not the one lying in this bed. Richard gave him a faint smile. You've been lying in this room all evening. Derek looked confused. How? You're pretending you're not scared. The words broke something in Derek. He looked down. Mara turned away for a moment. Some moments did not need witnesses. The procedure began. Mara assisted without hesitation. Her hands moved with controlled precision. The cardiologist noticed. You're very comfortable with this. Mara kept her eyes on the patient. I've assisted before. Recently? Not recently. The doctor didn't ask again. The fluid was carefully drained. Richard's pressure began to improve. 94. Then 98. 103. His heart rate slowed. His breathing became easier. The room finally released the breath everyone had been holding. Derek stood beside his father. Richard opened his eyes. Still here. Derek laughed softly. Unfortunately. Richard smiled. Good. Mara checked the monitor again. The danger had passed. But something bothered her. She looked at the hallway. A man stood near the elevators. Dark jacket. Baseball cap. No visitor bike. He was looking directly toward room 12. Mara watched him for several seconds. The man noticed her. Then he turned away. Mara stepped into the hallway. Sarah followed. Who is that? I don't know. Security. No badge. Mara looked toward the elevators. The doors opened. The man stepped inside. Before the doors closed, he looked back at Mara. Their eyes met. Then he disappeared. Mara immediately walked toward the security desk. Check the visitor log for the last 2 hours. The guard looked confused. Why? Because someone entered this floor without a visible badge. The guard checked the system. There are no unverified visitors. Mara looked at him. Then your system is wrong. The guard's expression changed. What makes you say that? I watched him. The guard checked the cameras. One screen showed the hallway. Another showed the elevator. The man appeared for only 3 seconds. Then the image froze. The guard frowned. That's strange. What? The camera lost connection. How long? 11 seconds. Mara looked toward room 12. 11 seconds was enough. Her military instincts returned. The same feeling. The same quiet pressure behind the eyes. Something was wrong. And this time it wasn't inside Richard's chest. It was inside the hospital. Mara turned to the guard. Lock the executive floor. He hesitated. Ma'am, I can't do that without authorization. Mara looked at him. Then call someone who can. The guard picked up the phone. Mara walked back toward room 12. Derek was standing beside his father. Everything okay? Mara looked at Richard. Then at Derek. Your father's condition has stabilized. Derek smiled with relief. Thank you. Mara nodded. But she did not smile. Because she had just realized something. The man near the elevator had not been looking for Richard's room. He had been looking for her. And for the first time since arriving at Harbor Ridge Medical Center, Mara wondered whether her past had finally followed her home. The executive floor was placed under temporary security control, but Mara Bennett did not feel relieved. She stood near the nurse's station, watching the elevator doors remain closed. The hospital security supervisor approached her. We reviewed the footage. And the man entered at 9:17. Mara looked at him. How did he get past the desk? We don't know. Badge? None. Visitor log? Nothing. Mara's eyes narrowed. Then someone let him in. The supervisor looked uncomfortable. We're checking access records. Mara nodded. Check every door between the parking garage and this floor. That's a lot of doors. Then start now. The supervisor walked away. Mara returned to Richard's room. His condition had improved after the procedure, but he was still weak. Derek sat beside him. For the first time since Mara had met him, Derek was completely silent. He wasn't making calls. He wasn't demanding anything. He wasn't talking about his father's company. He was simply sitting there. Richard opened his eyes. You look terrible. Derek smiled. You almost died. Almost isn't dead. That's your response? Richard looked toward Mara. She's still here. Derek followed his father's gaze. Mara was checking the monitor. She saved you. Richard corrected him. The team saved me. Derek looked at Mara. You knew. Mara stopped. Knew what? That something was wrong before anyone else. Mara checked the 4. I noticed a pattern. That's not normal. For a nurse? For anyone. Mara looked at him. Experience changes what you notice. Derek leaned back. Where did you get that experience? Mara didn't answer. Richard watched her carefully. You never told him? No. Why? Because he never asked the right question. Derek frowned. What is the right question? Mara looked directly at him. Why did I leave the Navy? Derek became quiet. Richard's expression changed. You did leave? Yes. Under what circumstances? Mara checked the monitor again. Normal circumstances. Richard didn't believe her. Neither did Derek. But before either could ask another question, a security alarm sounded from the hallway. Everyone turned. A red light flashed above the elevator. The security supervisor rushed toward the nurse's station. Lockdown. Mara immediately moved toward the door. Why? Someone attempted to access the restricted records system. Whose records? The supervisor looked at her. Richard Vance. Derek stood. Who tried? We're tracing it. Richard's face became serious. Victor. Derek looked at his father. You think it's him? Richard shook his head. I think someone wants us to think it's him. Mara listened carefully. That answer made more sense than she wanted it to. If Victor Kane wanted Richard's medical information, he had options. He could pressure someone, bribe someone, threaten someone. But the strange visitor had not acted like a businessman. He had moved like someone trained to avoid attention. Mara walked toward the security office. The supervisor followed. Where are you going? To see the access log. You aren't authorized. Then authorize me. I can't. Mara stopped. The supervisor looked nervous. Ms. Bennett, this is a security investigation. So am I. He stared at her. What does that mean? Mara looked toward the hallway. It means I know what it looks like when someone is testing a building. The supervisor said nothing. Mara continued. They didn't break in. They walked in. Exactly. She pointed toward the elevator. They wanted us to notice the camera failure. Why? Because a distraction is useful when you're trying to hide something else. The supervisor's face became pale. What else? Mara looked toward Richard's room. The patient. Derek had heard every word. He approached them. What are you saying? Mara looked at him. Your father may not have been the only target. Derek's expression hardened. Then who? Mara didn't answer. She was thinking. The stranger had looked directly at her. Not at Richard. Not at Derek. At her. And that bothered her more than the security breach. Mara returned to the room. Richard was awake. You recognized him, Richard said. Mara stopped. What? The man near the elevator. Derek looked between them. What does that mean? Richard's eyes remained on Mara. You knew he was trouble before you knew who he was. Mara looked at him. I've seen people like him. Where? Mara didn't answer. Richard slowly nodded. Military. Mara remained silent. Derek's eyes widened. You're saying that guy was military? Maybe. How would you know? Mara looked toward the door. Because he didn't walk like a visitor. Derek frowned. How does a visitor walk? Like someone who expects to be stopped. And he didn't? No. Richard looked thoughtful. Because he expected the door to open. Mara nodded. Exactly. The room fell silent. Then Richard said something that changed everything. I never told anyone I was coming here. Derek turned toward him. What? I wasn't supposed to be admitted until tomorrow. Mara looked at him. Who knew? Richard began counting silently. My cardiologist. Who else? My assistant. Who else? Hospital administration. Derek frowned. And me? Mara asked. Anyone from the company? Richard shook his head. No. Mara looked toward the security camera outside the room. Then someone inside the hospital knew. Derek stood. We need to get you out of here. No. Derek looked shocked. What? Richard shook his head. I'm not leaving. Dad, someone just breached the security system. And I'm safer here than I would be outside. How? Richard looked at Mara. Because she's here. Mara stared at him. Derek looked at her too. You trust her? Richard answered immediately. More than I trust most people I have known for 20 years. Mara didn't react. But something inside her shifted. She wasn't used to being trusted. She was used to being useful. There was a difference. A few minutes later, Dr. Hayes returned. Richard's condition remained stable. The pressure was improving. The fluid had been drained. But Nora still looked worried. The procedure went well, she said. Richard nodded. Thank you. Nora looked at Mara. Security tells me there's a problem. There is. How serious? Mara glanced toward the hallway. Someone accessed restricted information. Nora's face tightened. Patient records? Richard's. Nora looked at Richard. That's concerning. It is more than concerning, Mara said. Nora looked at her. What do you mean? Someone knew exactly where he was before his admission was public. Nora became quiet. Are you suggesting hospital staff? I'm suggesting we don't assume anything. Derek interrupted. Who has access? Nora listed the departments. Cardiology, nursing, admissions, administration, medical records, security, certain IT personnel. Mara asked, how many? Dozens. Then we don't have a suspect. No. We have a list. Derek looked at Mara. You've done this before. Mara looked at him. Done what? Investigated people. No. You are lying. Mara's expression hardened. You've spent your entire life believing that confidence means you are entitled to answers. Derek stepped closer. And you've spent yours believing nobody deserves to know anything about you. Richard watched them. Enough. Both stopped. Richard looked at his son. You want answers because you're afraid. Then he looked at Mara. And you refuse to give answers because you're afraid. Mara stared at him. Richard smiled weakly. Maybe that's why you two understand each other so well. Neither responded. Outside the room, a nurse suddenly shouted. Security. Mara turned immediately. She ran into the hallway. A medication cart had been left beside the service elevator. The cart was open. One drawer was empty. Mara stopped. Who owns this cart? A nurse approached. Third floor pharmacy. Why is it here? I don't know. Mara examined the cart. Nothing appeared disturbed. Then she noticed something. A small black device was attached beneath the handle. She crouched. The device had no hospital markings. Mara's expression changed. Everyone back. The nurse stepped away. Derek came into the hallway. What is it? Mara raised a hand. Stay back. The security supervisor arrived. What happened? Mara pointed. That doesn't belong here. He looked at the device. Could be a tracker. Could be a transmitter. Can you identify it? Mara shook her head. Not without touching it. The supervisor looked at her. How do you know that? Mara didn't answer. The device suddenly blinked. Once. Twice. Then stopped. Mara's entire body became still. She recognized the pattern. Not from a hospital. From somewhere else. A place where small devices could mean someone was watching from very far away. Her mind returned to a night years earlier. A dark building. A broken radio. A teammate whispering that they were being watched. Then an explosion. Mara blinked. The hallway returned. The security supervisor was speaking. Ms. Bennett. She looked at him. Get everyone away from the service corridor. Why? Because if that device is active, someone may be waiting for us to gather around it. The supervisor immediately began moving people. Derek stared at Mara. You recognized it. Mara looked at him. I recognized the behavior. That's not an answer. It is the only one you're getting. Derek looked frustrated. Then Richard's monitor alarm sounded from inside the room. Mara turned. Her entire focus changed. She ran back. Richard's pressure was dropping again. The procedure had helped. But something else was happening. His heart rate was climbing. His oxygen level was falling. Nora rushed to the bedside. What changed? Mara checked the line. Pressure falling again. How much? 86. Nora looked at Richard. Any pain? Richard nodded. Yes. Mara examined him. Then she saw it. The drainage line. The flow had suddenly stopped. She checked the tubing. There's resistance. Nora immediately understood. Could be a clot. Mara nodded. Or a mechanical obstruction. Derek stepped forward. What does that mean? It means the fluid may be collecting again. His face went pale. Can you fix it? Nora looked at the equipment. We need to assess the drain. Mara was already preparing. Her movements became faster. Calm. Precise. Controlled. The same hands that had once worked inside a shaking aircraft now moved through the hospital room without hesitation. Nora noticed. You've definitely done this before. Mara didn't look up. Focus on the patient. Nora did. Derek watched Mara work. For the first time, he wasn't seeing an ordinary nurse. He was seeing someone who had been waiting years for the world to give her another emergency. And now the emergency had arrived. But Derek still didn't know the most important truth. The man near the elevator was not the only person who had entered the hospital that night. Someone else had been watching Mara from the moment she arrived. And that person knew exactly who she had been before she became Mara Bennett. The drainage line had stopped moving. Mara Bennett noticed it before anyone else. She stared at the clear tubing for 2 seconds, then leaned closer. Don't touch anything yet. Dr. Nora Hayes looked at the line. Blocked? Possibly. Richard's breathing became more difficult. His blood pressure was falling again. 86. Then 84. Derek stepped toward the bed. What is happening? Nora answered quickly. The fluid may be building again. Derek looked at Mara. But you already drained it. Yes. Then why is it coming back? Mara checked the tubing carefully. We need to find out whether the drain is blocked or whether the fluid is collecting faster than expected. Derek's face went pale. Can that happen? Nora nodded. It can. Mara looked at Richard. Mr. Vance, stay still. Richard nodded. His eyes were half closed. Mara checked his breathing. Then she checked the drainage system. There was resistance. She called for another set of supplies. The room suddenly became crowded. Nurses moved around the bed. Nora reviewed the ultrasound. Mara watched Richard. The monitor showed a heart working harder and harder. She had seen that look before. Not the same patient. Not the same hospital. But the same fight. A human body trying to stay alive while everyone around it struggled to understand how close the edge had become. Mara remained calm. Her voice never rose. Her hands never shook. Derek watched her. He finally understood something. The woman he had spent hours treating like an ordinary employee was not afraid of the emergency. She had been afraid of the emergency being missed. Nora looked at Mara. The drain is obstructed. Can we clear it? Carefully. Mara prepared the equipment. Derek stepped closer. Do you need me to do something? Mara looked at him. Yes. What? Move away from the bed. Derek almost argued. Then he saw Richard's face. He stepped back. Mara worked with Nora. The obstruction was carefully addressed. A small amount of fluid began moving again. Then more. Richard's blood pressure stopped falling. 85. Then 87. Then 90. Nora watched the monitor. Better. Mara didn't relax. Wait. The pressure reached 92. Richard's breathing eased. Derek let out a breath. Is he okay? Nora nodded slowly. For the moment. Mara looked at the drainage line. For the moment isn't the same as stable. Nora looked at her. I know. The room finally became quiet. Richard opened his eyes. Derek. His son approached. I'm here. Richard looked at Mara. Then at his son. Listen to her. Derek nodded. I will. It was the first time he had said those words without resistance. Mara noticed. She said nothing. A few minutes later, security returned to the floor. The supervisor approached the nurse's station. We have new information. Mara looked at him. Tell me. The unidentified visitor was not the only person who entered the building under an incorrect credential. Mara's expression changed. How many? Derek overheard. 2. The supervisor nodded. One used an expired visitor badge. The other entered through the employee parking garage. Mara asked. Do we have a name? No. Camera. Partial image. Show me. The supervisor pulled up the footage. A figure walked through the garage. Dark jacket. Cap pulled low. Head down. Mara stared at the screen. Something about the person's movement bothered her. Not the face. The posture. The way the person scanned the area without appearing to scan it. The way he paused before every doorway. The way he never looked directly at the cameras. Mara had seen that before. Not in a hospital. Derek watched her. You recognize him. Mara shook her head. I recognize the training. The security supervisor looked confused. What kind of training? Mara didn't answer. Richard's voice came from the room. Military. Mara turned. Richard was looking directly at her. Derek stared at his father. How do you know? Richard gave a weak smile. Because I recognized the look on her face. Mara walked into the room. Richard continued. You've seen people who were trained to enter places without being noticed. Mara said nothing. Am I right? Mara looked at the monitor. Yes. Derek looked shocked. Then why didn't you tell us? Because I didn't know who he was. But you knew he was dangerous. I knew he was trained. That's not the same thing. No. Mara looked at him. But it is enough to stay careful. Derek lowered his voice. Who were you? Mara didn't answer. Richard watched her. You were not just a Navy nurse. Mara's eyes hardened. No. Derek looked at his father. What does that mean? Richard slowly shook his head. I don't know. Mara looked toward the hallway. But someone else does. The words changed the atmosphere. Derek stood straight. Who? I don't know. Then how can you say that? Because whoever entered this hospital knew something about me. Derek stared at her. You think they're here because of you? Mara didn't respond. Richard did. Maybe. Mara looked at him. Richard's voice became quieter. People don't usually watch a nurse after a patient's condition improves. Mara's eyes narrowed. He was right. The stranger had appeared before Richard's emergency. He had watched the room. He had disappeared. Then the hospital's security system had been accessed. And now someone had entered through another route. It was too organized to be random. Mara walked to the window. The storm had become heavier. The city lights were blurred by rain. She remembered another night. Another storm. Another person watching from the darkness. A voice from years ago came back to her. Don't look for the shooter. Look for the person watching the shooter. Mara closed her eyes for a moment. Then opened them. She knew what she had to do. Security needs to restrict the floor. The supervisor nodded. Already done? No. He looked at her. Not just visitors. Mara pointed toward the hallway. Employees too. His expression changed. You want to lock out hospital staff? I want every person entering this floor verified. We can't stop nurses from entering their assigned rooms. Then verify their assignments. Derek watched her. You think someone inside the hospital is involved? Mara looked at him. I think we don't know enough to assume they aren't. The security supervisor nodded reluctantly. I'll contact administration. Mara turned back toward Richard. His pressure was improving, but his face remained pale. She checked the monitor again. Your father needs rest. Derek nodded. Then he asked quietly, Can I speak with you? Mara looked at him. About what? Outside. Mara hesitated, then followed him into the hallway. Derek stopped near the window. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he spoke. I owe you an apology. Mara looked at him. That wasn't necessary. It is. You were scared. I was cruel. Mara didn't deny it. Derek looked toward his father's room. I thought if I controlled everything he would be safe. Mara leaned against the wall. That's common. You sound like you've seen it before. I have. With your patients? With people? Derek looked at her. Did you lose someone? Mara's expression changed. Only for a second. Derek noticed. But he didn't press. Instead he said, When you told me my father needed circulation more than recognition, I hated you. Mara almost smiled. I noticed. I thought you were disrespecting me. I wasn't. I know that now. A long silence passed. Derek looked toward the floor. I don't know how to handle this. Mara answered softly. Nobody does the first time. What if he dies? Mara looked at him. Then you will wish you had spent less time trying to control everything and more time being with him. Derek swallowed. I don't want that. Then stop fighting the people trying to help him. Derek nodded. Okay. Mara turned to leave. Derek stopped her. One more thing. She looked back. Whoever is watching this floor. If they are here because of you, I need to know. Mara's face became unreadable. I don't know why they are here. That's not what I asked. I know. Derek waited. Mara finally said, If they came because of me, I'll deal with it. Derek frowned. Alone. Mara looked at him. That's how I've always done it. Maybe you don't have to anymore. The words surprised her. Derek walked back into his father's room. Mara remained in the hallway. For a moment, she stood completely still. Then her phone vibrated. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. One message. You should have stayed out of this. Mara stared at it. A second message appeared. Your past isn't as buried as you think. Her breathing slowed. She didn't panic. She didn't call security immediately. Instead, she took a screenshot. Then she looked toward the hallway. Someone was standing at the far end. A hospital employee. Blue scrubs. ID badge. Hands in pockets. Watching her. Mara started walking. The employee turned and disappeared through a service door. Mara followed. She opened the door. Empty corridor. No footsteps. No person. Only the sound of ventilation. She looked down. Something was lying on the floor. A small metal object. Mara crouched. She recognized it immediately. A military identification tag. But it wasn't hers. She turned it over. 4 letters were engraved on the back. Mara's face went pale. She had not seen those letters in 8 years. They belonged to a unit that officially no longer existed. A unit that had been dissolved after her final operation. A unit whose surviving members had been ordered never to discuss what happened. Mara closed her hand around the tag. Then someone spoke behind her. You really should have stayed retired. Mara turned. A man stood at the end of the corridor. Older. Calm. No hospital badge. No visitor badge. His face looked familiar. Not because she had seen him recently. Because she had seen him in a place she had spent years trying to forget. Mara stared at him. You. The man smiled. Hello, Mara. She took one slow step backward. You're supposed to be dead. His smile disappeared. So are several people who still remember that night. Mara's eyes hardened. What do you want? The man glanced toward Richard's room. Not your patient. Then who? You. The corridor seemed to become colder. Mara tightened her hand around the metal tag. The man continued. Someone has been searching for the truth about what happened 8 years ago. Mara said nothing. And tonight they finally found you. Before Mara could respond, the hospital lights suddenly went out. The entire floor fell into darkness. The lights went out so suddenly that the entire corridor seemed to disappear. For 1 second, Mara heard nothing except the storm outside. Then came the sound of alarms. A monitor began beeping inside Richard's room. Someone shouted from the nurse's station. Another voice called for emergency lighting. Mara did not move toward the sound immediately. She stayed facing the man at the end of the corridor. The stranger was gone. Only darkness remained. Then the emergency lights flickered on. Red lights washed the hallway in a dim glow. Mara turned and ran toward Richard's room. The monitor was sounding continuously. Derek was beside the bed. What happened? The lights went out, he said. Mara looked at Richard. His eyes were closed. His breathing had become shallow. The monitor showed a rapidly changing rhythm. Mara checked his pulse. Present. Weak. Richard, can you hear me? His eyes opened slightly. Yes. Stay with me. Derek looked terrified. His pressure? Mara checked it manually. 78/46. Derek stared at the number. That's bad. Yes. Nora entered the room. What happened? Sudden pressure drop. Nora checked the monitor. Get another ultrasound. Mara prepared the equipment. The hospital lights remained on emergency power. Outside the room, security officers moved through the corridor. Someone shouted that the elevators had stopped. Another alarm sounded downstairs. The entire building seemed to be struggling against the storm. But Mara focused only on Richard. The ultrasound showed fluid around the heart again. Nora's expression tightened. He's feeling poorly. Mara nodded. We need to relieve the pressure. Nora looked toward the emergency equipment. Agreed. Derek stepped closer. What are you going to do? Nora answered. We need to drain more fluid. Now. Derek looked at Mara. Can she do it? Nora didn't answer. Mara did. We don't have time to debate who can. The words came out so calmly that Derek immediately stepped back. Mara prepared the equipment. Her hands were steady. The emergency lights cast shadows across the room. Richard looked at her. Mara. Yes. If this goes badly. It won't. You don't know that. No. She looked directly into his eyes. But I'm not going to waste time imagining it. Richard gave a weak smile. Good. Mara began the procedure. Nora assisted. The first attempt produced very little. Mara adjusted carefully. The pressure continued falling. 74. 71. Derek looked at the monitor. He's dying. Mara didn't look up. Not yet. You keep saying that. Because he isn't. Richard's breathing became shallow. Mara repositioned the equipment. Then fluid appeared. A small amount. Then more. Nora watched the monitor. Pressure? 76. Mara continued. 79. Good. Keep watching. The pressure climbed. 82. 85. 88. Richard's breathing slowly improved. Derek covered his mouth. He looked at Mara's hands. They were covered in blood. But they did not shake. Something inside him changed. He remembered the medication room earlier. He remembered standing over her. He remembered demanding that she obey him. Now he realized how little he had understood. Mara wasn't fearless. She was disciplined. There was a difference. Nora checked the ultrasound. The right side is opening again. Mara secured the temporary drainage. Pressure? 90. Richard opened his eyes. He looked at Mara. You were right. Mara shook her head. I was observant. Richard smiled faintly. Same thing tonight. The room became quiet again. Then footsteps approached from the corridor. Security officers entered. One of them was holding a flashlight. We have a problem. Mara looked at him. What kind? The man from the corridor was seen near the service elevator. Derek stood. Where is he? He's gone. Mara asked. Which direction? Lower level. How long ago? Less than 2 minutes. Mara looked toward Richard, then toward the hallway. Lock the stairwells. The security officer nodded. We're doing that. Not enough. What else? Check the ICU access doors. Why? Because he may not be trying to leave. The officer stared at her. Mara continued. He may be trying to reach another floor. Derek understood. He's coming back for my father. Mara looked at him. Maybe. Richard spoke quietly. Or he wants me to believe that. Mara turned toward him. Richard's expression was serious. He wants something. Mara nodded. That's what I think too. Derek looked between them. What could he want? Richard didn't answer. Mara did. Information. About what? Your father's business. Richard closed his eyes. Or something older. Mara looked at him. What happened 8 years ago? Derek stared at his father. What are you talking about? Richard didn't respond. Mara stepped closer. You know something. Richard slowly opened his eyes. I know a lot of things. This is connected to my past. Richard was silent. Derek looked confused. How would my father know anything about your past? Mara watched Richard. He finally spoke. Because I was there. Mara's face changed. Where? Not physically. Richard paused. I funded the operation. Derek stared at him. What operation? Richard looked toward the window. An overseas security contract. Mara's eyes narrowed. Which one? Richard didn't answer. You know what I'm talking about. I know enough. Then tell me. Richard shook his head. Not here. Mara stepped closer. People are watching this hospital because of something that happened 8 years ago. Richard looked at her. Yes. Derek's voice became sharper. Dad, what did you do? Richard looked at him. I made a decision. What decision? One that saved my company. Derek stared at him. And cost other people their lives? Richard's silence answered. Mara felt something cold move through her chest. The memories came back. The mission. The evacuation. The names on her watch. The people who had not made it home. She had spent years believing the operation had failed because of a chain of military decisions. But perhaps there had been another reason. Money. Contracts. Information. Someone had wanted the mission to happen. Someone had wanted certain people removed. Mara looked at Richard. Who died? Richard's face became pale. I don't remember every name. Mara's voice became colder. I do. Derek looked at her. Mara continued. 12 people were involved. Richard looked away. 9 survived. 11. Richard froze. Mara stared at him. 11 survived. Richard looked at her. Then you know. I know exactly what happened. Derek looked between them. What happened? Neither answered. A security officer rushed into the room. We found the suspect. Mara turned. Where? Lower surgical corridor. Alive? Yes. Armed? We don't know. Mara looked at Derek. Stay here. Derek nodded. She moved toward the door. Richard grabbed her hand. Mara. She stopped. Don't go. Mara looked at him. Someone came here because of what happened years ago. Richard shook his head. That man isn't the person you think he is. Mara stared at him. Who is he? Richard's eyes filled with fear. Someone who believes I killed his brother. Mara went still. Who? Richard whispered the name. Jonah Reed. The name hit her like a physical blow. Mara knew it. Everyone from that mission knew it. Jonah Reed had been one of the best field operators she had ever worked with. Officially, he had died during the evacuation. But Mara had never believed the official report. She had found his medical tag. She had seen the blood. But she had never found his body. She looked at Richard. You're saying Jonah had a brother? Richard nodded. An older brother. What's his name? Richard swallowed. Marcus Reed. Mara's eyes hardened. The stranger in the hallway. The posture. The training. The voice. It made sense. She walked into the corridor. Security had moved toward the lower surgical wing. Mara followed. Derek ignored her instruction and came after her. Stay with your father. I can't. Why? Because I need to know what happened. Mara stopped. This isn't your fight. Derek looked at her. Neither was my father's illness. Mara stared at him. But you're here. Yes. He took a breath. Maybe that's what you're trying to teach me. Mara didn't answer. They reached the surgical corridor. A security officer stood beside a closed door. He's inside. Mara listened. Nothing. Then a faint sound. Metal hitting the floor. She raised her hand. Everyone stopped. Mara slowly approached the door. She looked through the narrow glass panel. The corridor beyond was empty. She opened the door. A man stepped from the shadows. Derek shouted. The man raised something in his hand. Mara moved instantly. She stepped between him and Derek. The man froze. For 1 second, they stared at each other. Mara recognized him. Marcus Reed. Older now. Scarred. Tired. But alive. You. Marcus lowered the weapon slightly. You remember me. Mara's voice was quiet. I remember your brother. Marcus's eyes became wet. Then you remember what happened. I remember the report. You believe it? No. Marcus looked at Derek. Your father paid for the operation. Derek looked stunned. What operation? Marcus laughed bitterly. The one that killed my brother. Mara stepped forward. Put the weapon down. Marcus shook his head. I didn't come here to kill you. Then why are you here? To make him tell the truth. He pointed toward Richard's room. Derek looked at Mara. What truth? Marcus stared at him. Your father knew the extraction zone was compromised. Richard's voice came from the hallway behind them. I didn't know. Marcus turned. Security officers immediately raised their weapons. Richard was being wheeled toward the corridor by Nora. Derek stared at his father. You came out here? Richard looked at Marcus. I wanted to tell you myself. Marcus's face twisted with anger. Tell me what? Richard looked at Mara, then at Marcus. I knew there was a risk. Marcus stepped forward. You knew. I knew there was intelligence suggesting an attack. And you sent them anyway. Richard lowered his head. The contract deadline was approaching. Mara closed her eyes. Everything became clear. The mission had not been a simple failure. It had been a calculated risk. People had died because someone believed the operation could continue despite the warning. Marcus raised his weapon again. Derek stepped forward. Don't. Marcus looked at him. You don't understand. No. Derek shook his head. But I understand what happens when fear turns into anger. Marcus stared at him. Derek continued. If you kill him, you don't get your brother back. Marcus's hands trembled. Mara watched him carefully. She saw the moment his anger began to crack. Then she saw something else. A small movement near his jacket. A hidden device. Mara's instincts screamed. Marcus, don't move. He froze. What? Mara stared at his jacket. Someone put something on you. Marcus looked down. A tiny electronic device was attached beneath the fabric. His face changed. What is that? Mara stepped closer. Don't touch it. The security officers moved backward. Derek stared at the device. Is it a bomb? Mara shook her head. I don't know. Marcus looked terrified. Who put it there? Mara looked toward the dark corridor. That's the question. The lights flickered again. Then every security camera in the hallway turned toward them. One by one. Mara stared at the cameras. Someone was watching. And whoever was watching had just turned Marcus Reed from an attacker into a target. The cameras continued turning toward them one after another. Mara stood completely still. Marcus Reed stared at the small device beneath his jacket. What is it? Mara kept her voice low. I don't know yet. Derek looked toward the security officers. Can you disable it? One officer shook his head. We don't know what it is. Mara looked at the device again. Then nobody touches it. Marcus swallowed. I came here to confront Richard. Mara nodded. I believe you. I didn't put this on myself. I know. Richard watched from the wheelchair. Marcus. Marcus looked at him. You knew about the operation. Richard closed his eyes. I knew there was a risk. Marcus's voice broke. A risk? He stepped forward. You called it a risk because you weren't the one walking into the building. Mara raised one hand. Stay where you are. Marcus stopped. Mara looked at the device again. There was a tiny blinking light. Once. Twice. Then nothing. Her instincts told her the device wasn't designed to explode. It was designed to communicate. Someone was using Marcus as a signal. Mara looked toward the cameras. Everyone get away from the hallway. The security officers began moving. Derek looked confused. Why? Because whoever put that device on him wants to know where he is. Richard understood. And they know now. Mara nodded. A sound came from the ceiling. A faint electronic click. Then the hallway lights went completely dark again. Derek instinctively stepped toward Mara. She grabbed his arm. Stay behind me. I can help. Not yet. A door slammed somewhere in the darkness. Then another. Footsteps moved quickly through the corridor. Marcus whispered, They're here. Mara listened. One person. No. Two. She could hear different rhythms. One was fast. The other was controlled. She knew what that meant. The first person was moving. The second was waiting. Mara looked at the security officer. How many exits? 3. Block the 2 nearest. He nodded. Derek whispered, What about the third? Mara looked toward the far corridor. Leave it open. Why? Because people run toward the exit they think is available. Derek understood. You want them to come through there. Mara nodded. The lights came back on. A man appeared at the end of the corridor. Dark clothing. Face partially covered. He raised a weapon. The security officers moved. Mara stepped sideways. She didn't rush him. She watched his hands. The man fired. The sound exploded through the hallway. Everyone ducked. Mara moved toward Marcus. She pulled him behind the wall. Another shot struck the doorframe. Derek froze. Mara grabbed him. Move. They moved into a side room. Richard and Nora were already being pushed behind a medical cart. The attacker advanced. Mara watched from the doorway. She saw the weapon. She saw his position. She saw the narrow corridor. And she noticed something else. He wasn't trying to shoot anyone. He was shooting to force them into one direction. Mara whispered to Derek. He's hurting us. Toward where? The service elevator. Derek looked terrified. What do we do? Mara looked at him. You wanted to know what I used to do. He nodded. This is it. Mara stepped into the corridor. Derek grabbed her arm. You're going out there? Yes. With what? Mara looked around. A metal 4-pole stood beside the wall. She took it. With this. Derek stared at her. You can't be serious. Mara gave him one calm look. Stay here. She moved. The attacker fired again. Mara ducked behind the wall. She waited. 1 second. 2. 3. Then she moved quickly across the corridor. The attacker followed her movement. That was what she wanted. She reached the corner. He stepped forward. Mara swung the 4-pole toward his weapon arm. The weapon dropped. The attacker lunged. Mara shifted her weight. He lost balance. She caught his wrist, turned his arm, and forced him against the wall. He struggled. Mara remained controlled. She didn't strike unnecessarily. She simply removed his ability to attack. The security officers rushed forward. Don't shoot. Mara held the man's arm. Take the weapon. One officer grabbed it. The attacker tried to pull free. Mara tightened her grip. Stop. He stopped. The entire fight had lasted seconds. Derek watched from the doorway. His mouth was slightly open. Mara looked toward him. Are you okay? He nodded slowly. Yes. The attacker laughed. You have no idea what you've walked into. Mara looked at him. I've walked into worse. The man's expression changed. You really are her. Mara froze. What did you say? He smiled. Lieutenant Commander Cross. The corridor became silent. Derek looked at Mara. What? Mara's face remained calm, but her eyes changed. The attacker continued, still hiding behind that nurse badge. Mara looked at the security officers. Take him away. The man laughed again. You can't hide forever. Mara stepped closer. Who sent you? He smiled. You already know. Tell me. Victor Kane. Richard's expression changed. Derek looked at his father. Victor. Richard slowly shook his head. No. The attacker smiled. Ask him about the Clark contract. Richard's face became pale. Mara looked at him. What contract? Richard said nothing. Marcus stepped forward. Now you know. Mara turned toward him. What does the Clark contract have to do with the operation? Marcus looked at Richard. He sold the route. Richard's eyes closed. Derek stared at his father. You sold information? Richard whispered. I didn't know they would attack. Marcus shouted. You knew enough. Security officers held him back. Mara stepped between them. Marcus. He looked at her. Tell me exactly what happened. Marcus breathed heavily. 8 years ago, your team was sent into a region where the extraction route had already been compromised. Mara listened. Someone leaked the route. Marcus continued. Your command was warned. Mara's face became still. And Richard knew? Marcus nodded. He knew there was a threat. Richard finally spoke. I was told the intelligence was unconfirmed. Mara turned toward him. Who told you? Richard looked at her. Victor. Mara's eyes narrowed. So Victor gave you the warning? Yes. And you ignored it. Richard looked down. I believed the mission would continue safely. Marcus laughed bitterly. Because the contract was worth more than the people. Richard looked broken. I was wrong. Mara stared at him. For years she had carried questions. Why had the route changed? Why had the evacuation failed? Why had intelligence arrived too late? Why had certain names disappeared from the official report? Now she had part of the answer. But another question remained. Why is Victor trying to kill you now? Richard looked toward the attacker. Because he wants something. What? The original files. Mara understood. The operation had been documented. If the original files still existed, they could prove who had known about the danger. Derek looked at his father. Where are they? Richard hesitated. Mara stepped closer. Richard. He looked at her. The files are not with me. Where? At the old company archive. Derek frowned. That archive was destroyed. Richard shook his head. That is what everyone believes. Mara stared at him. Who has access? Richard looked at Derek. Only you. Derek's expression changed. Me. I put the archive under your name. Why? Because I knew one day someone might come looking. Mara looked at Derek. Do you have the access credentials? Derek nodded slowly. Yes. The attacker suddenly laughed. Everyone turned. You already lost. Mara looked at him. Why? He smiled. Because they have been inside that archive for 3 days. Derek froze. That's impossible. The man laughed again. Your security system isn't as strong as you think. Mara looked toward the security supervisor. Get your people to the archive. The supervisor nodded. Where is it? Derek answered. 20 minutes from here. Mara looked at Richard. You knew this could happen. Richard nodded. I hoped it wouldn't. Mara looked at the attacker. Who else is involved? The man said nothing. Mara waited. Then he smiled. You're asking the wrong question. What question should I ask? He looked toward Richard. Ask why Victor wants the files now. Richard's face changed. Mara noticed. What changed? Richard didn't answer. Richard. He finally looked at her. Because the contract is being investigated again. By whom? Federal authorities. Derek looked shocked. You never told me. I wanted to protect you. You lied to me. Richard lowered his head. Yes. Derek stepped away. Mara watched him. For years, Derek had believed his father could solve every problem. Now he was discovering that some problems had been buried, not solved. The security supervisor returned. We have another issue. Mara turned. What? The archive alarm just activated. Derek looked at his phone. His face went pale. Someone is using my credentials. Mara's eyes narrowed. From where? Derek checked the screen. Inside the archive. Mara looked toward the hospital windows. The storm continued outside. She had two choices. Stay with Richard. Or go after the evidence. Then she remembered something Richard had said. The files were the reason someone had come. If the files disappeared, the truth disappeared with them. Mara looked at Derek. You're coming with me. He nodded. Richard tried to sit up. No. Mara looked at him. You stay here. Richard shook his head. You're going after something I buried. Yes. And you're going to expose me. If the truth requires it. Richard looked at her. I deserve that. Mara paused. Then she nodded. Derek looked toward the captured attacker. Who will watch him? Security stepped forward. We will. Mara looked at the man one final time. He smiled. You'll find nothing. Mara answered quietly. Then you have nothing to fear. She walked toward the elevator. Derek followed. Behind them, Richard remained in the hospital room. For the first time in decades, he had no control over what happened next. And for the first time in years, Mara was walking directly toward the truth she had spent 8 years trying to forget. The elevator doors closed. Neither Mara nor Derek noticed the small camera hidden above the ceiling panel. A tiny red light blinked once. Someone was watching them leave. And whoever it was already knew exactly where they were going. The elevator descended through the darkened hospital while Mara, Bennett, and Derek stood without speaking. Neither of them knew what waited at the archive. The only sound was the low vibration of the elevator, and the rain striking the outer walls of the building. Derek kept looking at his phone. My credentials are still active. Mara looked at him. That's what worries me. Why? Because if someone is using your credentials, they either stole them or they have access to the system. Derek swallowed. And if they have access to the system? They may know everything about your father. The elevator reached the parking level. The doors opened. Mara stepped out first. Derek followed. The hospital garage was almost empty. Rainwater flowed across the concrete floor. Their footsteps echoed between the parked cars. Derek unlocked his vehicle. Mara stopped him. Where are we going? The company archive. Where? 20 minutes from here. Drive. Derek started the engine. Mara sat in the passenger seat. As they left the hospital, she looked back at the building. One floor above them, Richard was surrounded by security. But Mara knew that safety was never just a locked door. It was information. It was timing. It was knowing who had access. And right now, someone seemed to know every move they made. Derek drove through the rain. After several minutes, he finally spoke. My father never told me about the operation. He didn't tell me either. You already knew? I knew the mission. Not the business side? No. Derek gripped the steering wheel. What happened to the people who died? Mara looked out the window. Some were listed as killed in action. And the others? Some were never properly identified. Derek was quiet. My father always said business decisions had consequences. Mara looked at him. That's an easy thing to say when someone else pays the price. Derek lowered his eyes. I know. The car continued through the rain. Then Derek asked the question he had been avoiding. Did you know my father before tonight? No. Then why does he seem to know so much about you? Because powerful people collect information. About nurses? About anyone connected to something they fear. Derek thought about that. Then his phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. His face changed. What? Mara asked. Someone just accessed the archive again. From where? Derek checked. Inside. Can you see the user? No. Can you shut down the credentials? I can try. Don't. Derek looked at her. Why? If they're inside the system, shutting down access may warn them. So what do? We let them think they still control it. Derek nodded. Mara looked at the road ahead. How much security does the archive have? 2 locked doors. Cameras. Alarm system. My credentials and a secondary code. Who has the secondary code? My father. Mara looked at him. Anyone else? Only the company security director. Name. Victor Kane. Mara became silent. Derek noticed. What? Nothing. You know that name. I know what your father told me. What did he tell you? That Victor was the person who warned him about the compromised operation. Derek's hands tightened on the wheel. So Victor knew. Maybe. Then why would he attack my father? Because people can change sides. Derek looked at her. Or because my father lied. Mara didn't answer. The archive building appeared 20 minutes later. It stood behind a line of warehouses near the industrial waterfront. The building looked abandoned. No company logo. No reception desk. No visible employees. Derek parked beside the entrance. Mara looked at the cameras. There are too few. Derek nodded. My father wanted the place forgotten. That may have been a mistake. They entered. Derek used his credentials. The first door opened. Mara stopped him before the second. Listen. Derek listened. Nothing. Mara opened the door. The corridor beyond was dark. A single emergency light flickered overhead. Derek whispered. Someone cut the main power. Mara nodded. Yes. They moved slowly. At the end of the corridor was a steel door. Derek entered his secondary code. The door opened. Inside were rows of locked cabinets. Paper files. Hard drives. Old computers. Boxes labeled by year. Derek walked toward the central terminal. Mara watched the room. How long have these files been here? Years. Who knows about them? My father. Victor. I don't know. Derek turned on the terminal. A login screen appeared. Then a message appeared. Access granted. Derek stared. I didn't enter anything. Mara's expression hardened. Someone already opened it. A file appeared on the screen. Archive 08. Derek clicked it. A list of names appeared. Mara stepped closer. She recognized them. Her heart stopped for a second. There were the names from the mission. The people she had remembered for 8 years. Beside each name were dates, locations, medical classifications, and one final column, risk status. Derek looked at her. What's this? Mara pointed. Those aren't casualty records. What are they? Target assessments. Derek stared at the screen. My father had this? Apparently. He opened another file. The first page contained a contract. The second contained payment records. The third contained an intelligence report. Derek read silently. Then his face turned pale. My father paid someone to change the extraction route. Mara took the document. She read it carefully. The signature was Richard Vance's. But there was another signature. Victor Kane. Derek stepped backward. My father lied. Mara looked at him. Yes. About everything. Not everything. Derek shook his head. He knew. He knew there was a risk. He knew people would die. Mara looked at the document. Yes. Derek covered his face. For several seconds neither spoke. Then the archive door closed. Mara turned. A man stood behind them. Victor Kane. He was holding a handgun. Derek froze. Victor smiled. You found it. Mara stepped between him and Derek. Victor looked at her. Lieutenant Commander Cross. Mara's voice was cold. Put the weapon down. Victor laughed. You always did prefer orders. You always did prefer hiding behind other people. Victor's smile disappeared. You know what happened? I know enough. No. You know the military version. Mara stared at him. I know 12 people entered that operation. Victor's expression changed. 11 survived. Mara's eyes hardened. 10. Victor looked at her. You forgot Jonah. I didn't forget him. Victor lowered the gun slightly. Good. Derek stared at him. You were behind this? Victor looked at Derek. Your father and I built everything together. Then why are you trying to kill him? Victor's face became cold. Because he became weak. Derek shook his head. You betrayed him. No. Victor looked toward the files. I corrected a mistake. Mara stepped forward. What mistake? Victor looked directly at her. Leaving you alive. The room became silent. Derek looked at Mara. Victor continued. Your team was supposed to disappear completely. Mara's eyes narrowed. Why? Because the operation was never what your commanders told you. Derek stared at him. What was it? Victor smiled. A private extraction. Mara's face changed. Of what? Not weapons. Then what? People. Mara stared at him. Victor continued. Scientists. Derek looked confused. Scientists. Victor nodded. The government wanted them moved. Your unit was sent to secure the route. Richard was paid to provide transportation and logistics. Mara remembered the mission. The location. The sudden change. The confusion. The order to evacuate. She had always thought the chaos was accidental. Now she understood. Someone had wanted the mission to fail. Why kill the scientists? Victor answered. They knew too much. Derek looked at the files. And my father? Your father wanted out. Mara looked at Victor. So he kept evidence. Victor nodded. He kept copies. Why? Because he knew I would eventually come for him. Mara looked toward the door. Where is Marcus? Victor smiled. Still in the hospital. Mara's expression changed. Why? Because he was never supposed to survive either. Derek took a step forward. You used him. Victor looked at him. Everyone was useful. Mara's eyes hardened. You sent Marcus to attack Richard. I sent Marcus to create a distraction. And the device? Victor smiled. Insurance. Mara understood. The device attached to Marcus had been designed to track him. Victor had used him to locate the hospital. Then he had sent another person to create confusion. The entire night had been planned. The power failure. The security breach. The stolen credentials. The stranger. Everything. Mara looked at Victor. You expected me to follow. Of course. Why? Because I knew who you were. Derek stepped beside Mara. Victor laughed. You really don't understand, do you? Derek stared at him. What? Your father wasn't the only one who knew about her. Victor pointed toward Mara. I've been watching her for years. Mara's face became still. Then you know what happens when someone corners me. Victor raised the gun. Yes. He fired. Mara moved. The bullet struck the metal cabinet. Derek dropped behind a desk. Mara grabbed the nearest heavy object and threw it toward Victor. He stepped aside. She moved toward him. Victor fired again. Mara ducked. She closed the distance. The gun fell. Victor struck her. Mara staggered. He tried to reach the weapon. She caught his arm. They struggled. Derek looked up. He saw Mara fighting. Not wildly. Not angrily. Precisely. Every movement had a purpose. Victor managed to break free. He reached for the gun. Derek moved first. He kicked the weapon away. Victor turned toward him. Mara used the moment. She grabbed Victor and forced him to the floor. Security officers rushed into the archive. Mara held Victor's arm until they secured him. Then she stood. Her breathing was heavy. Her leg hurt. But she remained upright. Derek stared at her. You were injured. I've fine. You were shot at. I'm aware. He almost laughed. You say everything like it's nothing. Mara looked at him. Because panic doesn't improve the situation. Derek nodded. Then he looked toward the files. What happens now? Mara looked at the documents. The truth comes out. Back at Harbor Ridge, Richard was still in intensive care. Marcus had been placed under guard. The hospital's security breach was now being treated as a criminal investigation, and the files from the archive were being secured as evidence. But the story was not over, because Richard had one final secret. And when Mara returned to the hospital, he asked her to come into his room alone. He looked older than he had that morning. Did you find it? Mara nodded. Everything. Richard closed his eyes. Then you know. I know enough. He looked at her. Are you going to hate me? Mara was silent. Then she answered. I don't know. Richard nodded. That's fair. Mara stood beside the window. Outside, the storm was finally weakening. Morning light had begun to appear over the harbor. For 8 years, Mara had believed her past was something she needed to escape. Now she understood something different. You can run from a place. You can leave a uniform. You can change your job. You can become someone the world barely notices. But truth has a way of finding people who bury it. Richard looked at her. What will you do now? Mara looked at the scratched watch on her wrist. I don't know. Then the hospital door opened. Derek entered. He was carrying something. A folder. He placed it on the table. I found this in the archive. Mara looked at it. Richard's face changed. What is that? Derek opened it. Inside was a photograph. Mara picked it up. Her hands became completely still. The photograph showed her old medical team. Everyone was there. Except one person. Jonah Reed. And written on the back were 6 words. He survived the extraction. Mara looked at Richard. Then at Derek. For 8 years, she had mourned a man whose body had never been found. Now she had proof that he might have survived. And somewhere beyond the hospital walls, someone else was waiting for Mara to discover where he had gone. The photograph remained in Mara's hand. She could not look away from it. 11 people stood together in the picture, smiling beneath a pale morning sky. Some were looking directly at the camera. Others were looking at each other. Mara remembered every face, every voice, every name. And the man who was supposed to be dead was standing there too. Jonah Reed. Alive. Derek watched her carefully. Is that him? Mara nodded. Yes. Richard turned his face toward the window. Derek looked at his father. You knew. Richard didn't answer. Derek's voice became harder. You knew Jonah survived. Richard finally spoke. I suspected. Mara placed the photograph on the table. Where? Richard swallowed. I don't know. That's not enough. I never saw him after the extraction. But you knew he was alive. I received information. From whom? Richard looked at her. Victor. Mara's eyes narrowed. What did he say? He said Jonah had survived. Then why did the official report list him as dead? Richard looked down. Because Victor told me the report had already been submitted. Mara stared at him. You accepted that? I was afraid. The admission surprised her. Richard continued. I had already lost control of the company. Victor had access to the contracts, the accounts, the people who worked for me. I knew he was dangerous. You could have told someone. I thought I could handle it. Mara gave a quiet, bitter laugh. That sounds familiar. Richard looked at her. You mean Derek? Yes. Richard nodded. He learned from me. Derek stood near the door. For once he did not argue. He simply listened. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. An unknown number. Mara noticed. Don't answer. Derek stopped. The phone continued ringing. Then it stopped. A message appeared. Derek opened it. His face changed. Mara took the phone. The message contained only one sentence. Jonah is waiting. Under it was a location. Derek looked at Mara. What do we do? Mara stared at the screen. Richard slowly sat up. You can't go. Mara looked at him. Why? Because that's what they want. Maybe. They could be setting a trap. They probably are. Derek looked confused. Then why go? Mara looked at him. Because if Jonah is alive, he may be the only person who can explain what happened. Richard shook his head. You don't know what he became. No. Mara looked at the photograph. But I know what he was. Derek stepped forward. I'm coming. Mara shook her head. No. I have to. Your father needs you. My father needs the truth. Richard looked at Derek. Go. Derek turned. Dad. Richard nodded. You've spent your entire life protecting me from consequences. He looked at Mara. Maybe it's time you learned how to face them. Derek nodded slowly. Mara looked at Richard. If we don't return, you will. Mara almost smiled. You sound confident. I have spent too many years being afraid. Mara placed the photograph in her pocket. Then she and Derek left. The location was an abandoned ferry terminal outside the city. They arrived just before sunrise. The storm had moved away. The roads were wet. The sky was gray. Mara parked several hundred feet from the terminal. Derek looked around. Nothing. That's what makes it dangerous. They walked toward the building. The doors were unlocked. Inside, the terminal smelled of salt water and old wood. Their footsteps echoed. Then a voice came from the darkness. You came. Mara stopped. Derek froze beside her. A man stepped into the light. Older. Thinner. His hair was streaked with gray. But Mara recognized him instantly. Jonah Reed. She stared at him. He stared back. Neither spoke. Then Mara whispered his name. Jonah. He smiled. Hello, Mara. For several seconds she couldn't move. Then she walked toward him. You were alive. I was. Why didn't you come back? Jonah looked away. Because I wasn't allowed to. By whom? Victor. Mara's voice became colder. Tell me everything. Jonah nodded. I've been waiting 8 years. Derek looked between them. Why? Jonah looked at him. Because your father's company was never the real target. Derek frowned. Then what was? Jonah looked at Mara. Your unit. Mara's face hardened. Why? Because someone wanted the operation erased. Who? Jonah shook his head. I don't know the final name. But you know the reason. Yes. Jonah stepped closer. The scientists weren't being transported because they were dangerous. Mara listened. They were witnesses. Derek looked confused. Witnesses to what? Jonah answered. An illegal weapons program. The words hung in the air. Mara remembered the mission. The strange containers. The sealed equipment. The orders nobody was allowed to question. Jonah continued. The scientists knew who was funding it. Who? Private contractors. Derek looked at Mara. Victor. Jonah nodded. Victor was one of them. Mara's expression changed. And my father? Jonah shook his head. Your father was not part of the program. Derek exhaled. But he helped them. Yes. Mara looked at Jonah. Why? Money. Jonah's answer was simple. At first. Then he continued. Later he realized what he had done. Mara asked. And that's why he kept the files. Jonah nodded. He wanted leverage. Against Victor. Yes. Derek looked angry. So my father wasn't trying to expose him. Not at first. What changed? Jonah looked at Mara. You. Mara stared at him. Me? Jonah nodded. Your team was never supposed to survive the extraction. Mara felt her chest tighten. Why? Because you saw the containers. The medical team saw everything. Exactly. Jonah looked down. They planned to remove everyone who could identify the operation. Mara remembered the night. The sudden attack. The radio failure. The evacuation route changing. People disappearing. She had always thought the mission had collapsed. Now she understood. It had been designed to collapse. Jonah continued. I was separated from the team. What happened? I was captured. Mara stared at him. By Victor? By people working for him. Why didn't they kill you? Because they needed information. About what? Your team. Mara's expression hardened. And you gave them nothing. Jonah smiled. You know me. Mara almost laughed. Then her eyes became wet. You should have come home. Jonah looked at her. I wanted to. Then why? Because I was warned. About what? Everyone who came looking for me would be killed. Mara lowered her eyes. Jonah continued. I stayed hidden because I believed it was the only way to keep the survivors alive. Mara looked at him. How many survived? Jonah paused. 10. Mara stared. 10. Yes. What happened to the others? Jonah looked away. They disappeared. Mara knew what that meant. They had never been properly accounted for. Their families had been given incomplete information. Their names had been buried beneath reports. For years, people had lived without knowing the truth. Derek looked at Mara. We need proof. Jonah nodded. I have it. He reached into his jacket. He removed a small storage device. This contains the original communications. Mara looked at it. Original? Unedited. From the operation? Yes. Derek stepped forward. Does it prove who ordered the attack? Jonah looked at him. It proves who knew about it. Who? Jonah looked directly at Mara. Victor. Mara took the device. Then we can expose him. Jonah shook his head. Not yet. Why? Because someone else has been moving pieces for years. Mara stared at him. Who? Jonah looked toward the entrance. That's why I called you here. The doors behind them closed. Derek turned. Two men entered the terminal. Mara immediately moved Derek behind her. Jonah stepped back. One of the men raised his hands. Relax. Mara didn't. Who are you? The man removed his coat. He wore a government identification badge. My name is Samuel Price. Mara recognized the name. Not personally. From old military reports. You were intelligence? Yes. Are you still? Yes. Derek looked confused. Why are intelligence officers involved? Samuel answered. Because this investigation has been open for 8 years. Mara stared at him. You knew Jonah was alive? Yes. You knew Victor was involved? We suspected. Then why didn't you stop him? Samuel looked at the floor. Because we needed the original evidence. Mara held up the storage device. You have it now. Samuel nodded. Yes. Derek stepped forward. And my father? He will have to answer for his decisions. Mara looked at him. Well, Victor? Samuel's expression hardened. If this evidence is authentic, Victor will answer for far more. Jonah looked at Mara. You finally have the truth. Mara stared at the storage device. For 8 years, she had wanted answers. Now they were in her hand. But answers were not the same as justice. And justice was not the same as healing. Derek looked at her. What are you going to do? Mara looked toward the sunrise outside the terminal. I think it's time everyone heard what happened. Back at Harbor Ridge, Richard watched the morning light enter his room. Security officers remained outside. Marcus sat under guard in another room. The hospital was beginning another day. Nurses walked through the corridors. Doctors reviewed charts. Patients waited for their families. The world had returned to normal. But Richard knew nothing would ever be normal again. Derek entered the room. Richard looked at him. Did you find him? Derek nodded. Yes. Richard closed his eyes. Is he alive? Yes. Richard breathed slowly. And Mara? She's with him. Richard nodded. I knew she would find him. Derek sat beside the bed. Dad. Richard looked at him. I'm sorry. Richard was silent. Derek continued. I spent years believing you were the strongest man I knew. Richard smiled sadly. I wasn't. I know. I just hid my fear better than most people. Derek looked down. Can you fix this? Richard shook his head. No. Then what do we do? Richard looked toward the window. We tell the truth. Derek nodded. For the first time, father and son understood each other without arguing. Several hours later, federal investigators arrived at Harbor Ridge. The archive files were transferred. The storage device was secured. Victor Kane was taken into custody. Marcus Reed was questioned and later released after investigators confirmed his role in exposing the conspiracy. The hospital security breach became part of the investigation. And Richard Vance agreed to cooperate. The story that had been buried for 8 years finally began to surface. Mara stood outside the hospital that afternoon. The rain had stopped. The harbor was calm. Derek joined her. What will you do now? Mara looked at the building behind them. I don't know. You could go back to the military. Mara smiled faintly. That life is over. You could stay here. Maybe. Derek looked at her. You saved my father's life. Mara shook her head. The medical team saved him. You were the one who noticed. That was my job. Derek smiled. You still don't like accepting praise? No. Why? Mara looked toward the harbor. Because praise makes people forget the people who weren't there to receive it. Derek understood. He didn't argue. Instead, he said, "My father wants to fund a new emergency training program." Mara looked at him. "For the hospital?" "Yes." "What kind?" "Advanced emergency response training." Mara was quiet. Derek continued. "He wants it named after the people who died." Mara looked at him. "Not after him?" "No." A small smile appeared on her face. "Then maybe he has finally learned something." Derek nodded. They stood silently. The wind moved across the harbor. Mara looked down at the old watch on her wrist. For years, she had carried it as a reminder of people she couldn't save. Now she saw it differently. It wasn't a reminder of failure. It was a reminder that people mattered. That their names mattered. That their stories mattered. And that sometimes the quietest person in the room was the one who noticed what everyone else missed. Derek looked at her. "You know everyone is going to talk about you after this." Mara shook her head. "I hope not." "They will. Then they'll eventually find someone else to talk about." Derek laughed. "You're impossible." Mara smiled. "Probably." They walked back toward the hospital. Behind them, the harbor reflected the afternoon sunlight. The storm was gone. The investigation would continue. Richard would face the consequences of his decisions. Victor would answer for his crimes. Jonah would finally return to the people who thought he was dead. And Mara would no longer need to hide behind a quiet name or an ordinary uniform. But she also understood something important. Being recognized was never the goal. Saving someone when it mattered was. And sometimes the person everyone overlooks is carrying the experience, courage, and strength that the entire room needs. Weeks later, Harbor Ridge Medical Center opened a new emergency training program. The first classroom was filled with nurses, doctors, paramedics, and medical students. Mara stood at the front. No medals. No military uniform. No dramatic introduction. Just a simple hospital badge. She looked at the group. Then she asked the question that had stayed with her for years. When everyone is watching the obvious problem, who is watching what everyone else missed? The room became silent. Mara smiled. That's where good medicine begins. And somewhere in the back of the room, Richard Vance listened quietly. He had once believed power meant controlling every outcome. Now he understood that real strength was different. It was knowing when to listen. Knowing when to admit you were wrong. And knowing when the quiet person beside you had already seen what everyone else was still trying to understand. Mara never became famous. She never wanted to. She returned to her work. She cared for patients. She trained younger nurses. She answered difficult questions. And whenever a new emergency appeared, she remained calm. Not because she believed nothing could go wrong, but because she had learned that courage was not the absence of fear. It was choosing to act correctly while fear was standing beside you. Years later, people at Harbor Ridge still remembered the night the lights went out. They remembered the powerful businessman whose life nearly ended. They remembered the mysterious security breach. They remembered the man who had been declared dead and suddenly returned. But the people who worked beside Mara remembered something else. They remembered the nurse who never shouted. The nurse who never demanded attention. The nurse who simply watched, listened, and acted when everyone else was still waiting. And that was why, whenever a difficult case entered the hospital, someone eventually asked the same question. Where is Mara? Because they had learned something. The quiet nurse was never just standing there. She was watching. She was thinking. And when the moment came, she was ready.